I'm very glad to invite my dearest friend, Deacon Dr. George Kiraz, to this church. He is not a stranger to many of you who have been in this church for many years. In fact, if you look back at the album of our church back in 1986, you will see him in the sanctuary as the thurifer, the one who is the incense, when late lamented His Holiness Patriarch Saka I visited Los Angeles, and our congregation back when our church was held in Hoover Street Church, Mora Friends Church at that time. So his association with our church goes very long back. He is very close to Father George Partuel and they lived as neighbors next to each other. I'm very glad that we have George's sister Ilaria and Theodora. Theodora actually this is the first time Theodora is at our church. She's in Germany. She's a doctor, retired now in Germany. And Ilaria has been in our church many times, and many of you know her as well. So welcome again to our church. George, as I mentioned, doesn't require a lot of introduction here. I consider George to be one of the luminaries who have contributed most to the intellectual capital of the church in this, not only in this century, in the past. He belongs in the set of luminaries like Patriarch Ephraim the first, from Berzon, Mor Gewargis Sahdo, he is in that league. And George, almost single-handedly, I would say, has brought the Syriac Church to the computer age. When I met him in 1996 for the first time when we started corresponding, and I was in my PhD program at UCLA. George was doing his PhD in computer science at Cambridge University. He also did a master's in Syriac studies at Oxford under the famed Professor Dr. Sebastian Brock. So we started corresponding. My intent was to create a website for the church. George was interested. We met at Burbank at St. Ephraim's Church, and that blossomed into a very, very long relationship between us. I have been privileged to work with him on many projects in support of the Syriac tradition and the church. Most notably, the Suryoyo, the Journal of Syriac Studies, which remains the premier academic journal of Syriac Studies. It's free online and in print. George, as you may not realize, has had an influence on our liturgical worship here as well. For instance, the Bible that we use, is the translation of the Syriac Peshitta, which many of you bought. George, you may not know, that ours was one of the first congregations to adopt, the new text when it came out. George was, very influential in the ensuring the accuracy of, the English translation of the Syriac text we use today. I and others here would not have, ventured, to start that kind of endeavor without the support of a renowned scholar like George, who, out of his love for the language and for the church, supported us through all of those. I happen to be George's second son's godfather as well, so this is a very close bond. There's also another association that George has with this church. He visited here in November '96 and gave us a talk at that time, and also met his wife, Christine, who is not with us here today, but it's a long history that George also has with this church. And with that introduction, without any ado, one of the things I want to mention is that George is here to promote the couple of the recent books that he published. He did a talk at UCLA and at USC in the last week. One of this is the Syriac Orthodox Church in North America. It's a history of the Syriac migration to the church starting in the 1880s and documented all the way to modern times. And the other is his own biography, What of the Willow Tree, which is not only a biopic, it's also a story of the struggles of the Syriac Christians. George is from original family, originates in Ivos near Karkut in Turkey, and they were uprooted because of the Saipho, went to Adana and then to Beirut, to Holy Land and such, and there's a history that he recounts here, and his own history all the way to migration to the US in the 80s. So he was here to promote these two books, and we can all, I'll tell you that George has dedicated his life. He's a computer linguist, a computer scientist. He could have done many other things in his life. He dedicated his life to the Syriac tradition, and is the president of the non-profit organization Beth Mardutho, the Syriac Institute, which does many things to bring the Syriac studies to the modern world. George is a research fellow at the Institute of Advanced Sciences. It's the same institute which Einstein was in his later years. So it's a prestigious institution that he holds fellowship at. And he teaches at Princeton University. He's also the president of Gewargis Press and the president of Beth Mardutho, the Syriac Institute, the nonprofit. You can all support his work. You can be 100% assured that any support that you offer him and the institutions that he runs is going to be the benefit for the church and its future generations. So without further ado, I will let George speak. By the way, George, if you recall, you may not recall, you brought this book back in 1990s if you have a copy of that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very nice and general introduction. I would like to thank Father Sabu, Thomas, for giving me the opportunity to talk to you this morning, and of course my friend Thomas. Before I talk, I would like to commend all of you on a beautiful ceremony, beautiful service, an organized service, an exemplary parish, I must say. The way you have incorporated the hymns into English so that these young men and young women can comprehend what is going on, that is really very important. So I was really impressed. I know that Thomas has worked for many years with his team on this book, and I think this is the first time I see it in action. I don't think of course he gave me a copy, but this is the first time I see it actually being utilized. So congratulations on that. Today is the feast of St. George, or we're commemorating it today, and that's what I will be, most of my talk will be on that. You probably know the icon of St. George, and you've seen paintings, and you've seen this big dragon, and a princess in the back, and all that imagery. Especially the dragon. There's no dragon. The dragon is an introduction, something that was introduced around the 10th century, and in the West, in Europe. So if you listen to what Abuna has been praying, to the hymns that you've been chanting for the Feast of St. George, you probably didn't hear anything about a dragon, because there is no dragon in the Syriac story. And we are lucky that the Syriac story that we have about St. George, although it is translated from an original Greek text, is the oldest text that survives. The original Greek is lost, only very few fragments exist, somewhere discovered in Nisana, in Palestine and elsewhere, but these are few sentences. But there is a 6th century manuscript in the British Library from Deir Surian, from the Syrian monastery in Egypt, and it has the full text of St. George. Only few pages are missing, and there's another old manuscript that has these few missing pages, and that's how we have the full story. So I'm just going to tell you a story today, but don't sleep. It's not a bedtime story, although you can use it for your kids at home. So this is how the story goes. There is a king of the Persians called Dadianos, and he wrote letters to all the other kings under him, and he said, there's this a new thing called this new group called Christians, and let's go and end this business of the Christians. So the kings got excited, and they organized all sorts of torture instruments to start persecuting the Christians because it was a new faith. There was one young man, he was a count, he was part of the military, and his name was George. We're talking about St. George. So this young man was already a Christian. He went to King Dadianos and he said, I am a Christian and I'm not afraid of your threats. The king said, cool down, listen, and you must confess your faith in Apollo. Apollo is the idol god at the time, according to the story. And then George said, no, I will not do that. So the king said, okay, well, let's torture this count called George. So the first thing that they did is they put him on the cross, like Jesus. They crucified him. But he didn't die. And then they took him down from the cross. And the text said they loosened the parts of the body. When you go to the chiropractor, he stretches you. They stretched him, but really badly. That was the second thing that they did. And then that wasn't enough. Then they put him on a wheel, the wheel of fortune. This was the wheel of torture. It was a wheel with nails. As they put him on the wheel, and they spun him on the wheel with nails. And then the story goes that they cut 10 pieces of his body. It gets gruesome a bit. We will not get into that. And then they take him and they throw him in a pit. And the story goes that Christ was seen in a chariot, and then Christ asked the angel Gabriel to go and get George from the pit. So the angel went and got George from the pit, and then George went to the king again. So the king looked at him, and after all these tortures, didn't recognize him, and he thought he's in the pit, he's dead by now. So he said, who are you? He goes, I am George, who was cut into pieces on the wheel. Of course, the king didn't believe it. And then they had him wear a shoe that has nails in it, just for additional fun, and they continued to torture him. Then they came and they asked him, well, if you are Christian, and if this Christianity business is a true faith, show us a miracle. And they told him there are planks of wood in this in the hallway in the hall where the king was sitting. Turn them back into trees, and some of these planks of wood came from trees that gave fruit, and some were planks from trees, are decorative trees that don't give fruit. And they said, the planks from trees with fruits have to become trees with fruits, and the trees without fruits, trees without fruits. So George gave some prayer, and indeed he turned those planks of wood into trees, those that make fruit into fruit, and those that don't make fruit were just decorative trees. Then another official came, and he told them, well, we need another miracle. They brought some corpses, and they said, we need to see these corpses alive as human beings. So again, George offered a prayer, and he touched them, and the dead people were no longer dead. And they asked, of course, these dead people, when they are alive now, they asked to be baptized, and they baptized. In order to humiliate St. George, then they told him, okay, we're going to take you and we're going to have you live with this woman, a widow, just to humiliate him. And he went there and he asked her, okay, I'm hungry, can you give me some bread? And she said, I don't have any bread. So he told her, well, the reason you don't have bread in your house is because you have no faith. There was a pillar in the house, and then he did a prayer, and then he turned that pillar into a tree. It was a tree that gave fruit, and then he ate from that fruits. When she saw that he was faithful, she asked him to cure her son, who was deaf, and then he cured her. So this is where you see a picture now, another portion of the story. You see in the picture the Queen Alexandria. Basically, when the queen saw all the things that he did, she believed in him, and then the king, of course, was very upset. So then they took Queen Alexandria outside of the town, and they killed her. And then finally, they took St. George also outside of the city to finally kill him. And St. George did a prayer just before he gets martyred, and then they killed him. And after they killed him, some light appeared. So this is basically how the story goes and how the story ends. Of course, stories of saints vary. There are stories of saints that are biographical, and they just give the life of a saint. And there are some stories of saints that talk about such miracles. And so these stories that talk about miracles, by time, they get expanded, and these stories become longer and longer. Some of the elements I mentioned could be unbelievable. This is all part of, today we call it historical fiction. Writers write stories based upon historical figures. So this is how the church fathers brought to life the lives of the saints by writing these stories. And Patriarch Avram Barsom, says that these stories are in two categories. Some categories are just biographical, and some of these stories have these additional elements. We don't have to think of it literally. The idea is to learn something from the story, that if we persevere in our faith, then we can attain righteousness. So this is the main thing that I wanted to talk to you about. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is what my friend Dr. Thomas Joseph mentioned about the work that we do for the Syriac heritage at the Institute. And the reason we do all this work, so that we can have access to stories like the story I just gave you, so that we can study these things and be able then to tell you these stories. And what we do is we gather texts from the church fathers, theological texts, historical texts, all sorts of texts. We use computer technology. We OCR it, which means we take pictures of these texts. We don't have time to type it. We have the computer read it automatically. But then we send it to the Middle East, to members of our church, to correct this text. And this is very important, not only for this work that we're doing, but also to help people. As you know, there are wars in the Middle East, in Syria, Iraq, now there are earthquakes, and people are in need of jobs. And luckily or unluckily, the difference in currencies makes it easy for us to give these people jobs. It doesn't cost us that much to give them full-time jobs. And even we help some of our young men and women in Kerala those who learn Syriac, they type text for us, they correct text, and that's how we get all this going. And we have a program where you can adopt one of these workers. It's not much, it's about $100 a month. It gives them a full-time job. If you're interested in doing something like that, just talk to my friend Dr. Thomas Joseph, and he can hook you up, and you can adopt somebody in the Middle East or in Kerala who will get a job and at the same time will be contributing to the heritage, for the preservation of our heritage. Thank you very much again, Father Sahdo, for giving me the opportunity to talk to you. And as my friend Thomas told you, I am not a guest. I've been in this with this parish probably before most of you. I see all young people. You know, unless you are really, really old, then maybe you've been here before me. Since you were in Los Angeles, and as he said, Father George was our neighbor, and many times he would ask me if I can go with him and help on the altar, especially when he didn't have enough deacons. And when Patriarch Zaka came, also I was the Shamiliono. So we go a long way together. Thank you again.